Want a chance to win a Spring Creek Model Train's 25th anniversary car? Sign up for their newsletter before December 15th for your chance to win each week. The Spring Creek Model Train's newsletter includes new product announcements, pre-order information, specials, coupons, and more. With drawings held each week, the sooner you sign up, the more chances you have to win. Head to the bottom of the homepage at springcreekmodeltrains.com and sign up for your chance to win. If you own a protothrottle, it's time to upgrade your fascia with TullyModels.com fascia protothrottle holders. Experience safe, one-handed operation of your protothrottle and easily shift from engineer to conductor in a snap. With 4 available configurations to choose from, including integrated cup and pick stick holders, Tully Models has a holder for you. Don't have a protothrottle? No problem. TullyModels.com has fascia holders for Digitrax and NCE throttles and holders for your smartphone, too. Check out the entire lineup at TullyModels.com.
At 1810 Designs, we believe true art takes time. Every piece we create is hand-painted, hand-assembled, and crafted with care right here in our Texas workshop. This holiday season, our hands are busy creating, but you can still give something truly special. An 1810 Designs gift card lets them choose their own handcrafted piece made just for them.
1810 Designs, enhancing the hobby. Give the gift of handmade this holiday season at 1810designs.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. On this episode, we're talking guardrails again. And when I say the words guardrails, you got to know who's coming. It is Matthew Freix. Matt, welcome back.
Always a pleasure.
Well, it's great to see you, Matt, and glad to have you here on the show to talk guardrails and how you've developed your own. We dove into this a bit in the past, but getting back to it, we've been talking a bit about freelance railroading, but it's kind of nice to come back to the prototype a little bit as well and talk that side and how you've developed this and how you've made it work for you and your needs on the prototype side.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, Ray, is, and I truly don't know how many people out there know this, but I have a bit of a freelance side. We'll say that 15 years or so ago, the freelance side of me kind of led to a dark time. We can jokingly say when it came to purchasing cars, because I feel like I fell into the trap that I see so many of my freelance friends and prototype friends as well that don't have a mission, and I think I'm not going to say I know that you're a Dave Ramsey guy. And, one of the things that I always remember from Dave Ramsey is making sure that every dollar you spend has purpose.
Right.
And when I was in this, really hardcore, we'll say freelance without guardrails phase, I used a word a lot that I admittedly just cringe when I hear now. And that word is justify. If you're having to justify a purchase, you shouldn't be making it. That's just my personal opinion.
And that what we all learn is that you can pretty much justify anything. It's, does it make sense? And I guess that's the boiling part that you got, right? To try to start making more sense out of those purchases.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Ray, what I found is I was doing all this research, and in my head, I was building a backstory and an operating scheme for, on paper, what was a pretty realistic freelance railroad. But then I think that what happens is we get so excited about our vision that we feel like it has to happen now. So I found myself on eBay and looking at train shops, and I'd see, oh, well, this guy's got 5 Frisco covered hoppers, and I think I could justify that. I could patch those. We could weather them and patch them, and oh, look, this guy, he's got some Pennsylvania Railroad cylindricals. Like, they're old. Old means that people would be getting rid of them. I should buy those, and so on and so on. And you get to the point where you've justified yourself into like a crazy hoarder's like basement. And one day I just looked at it and I'm like, this makes no sense to me anymore. It literally became almost overwhelming in the sense that I had all this rolling stock with zero purpose to any of it. And that was kind of a point where I had to step back from the freelance side of things, because at the time I didn't really understand this idea of guardrails, but I knew that I didn't like where it was going. I trended, and I knew that I didn't like where it was going. And what I did was I trended back towards my true passion of, prototype modeling. And that's when I started to pick up on this idea of guardrails. And admittedly, it's taken a decade plus to get to where I'm at now. But by creating guardrails for myself, every dollar I spend has purpose. I know that my friends will still judge the ever-loving whatever you want to say out of me and think that I waste money, but I can say that every dollar I spend has purpose, and I'm buying things for the right reasons, and not just because I can maybe justify it.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into the time before guardrails. You mentioned that you were trying to essentially justify. Was some of this also from ignorant bliss? I know that you've learned a lot over the last several years, especially about your prototype railroad that you're modeling, the Gateway Western. But before all of that, ignorant bliss is kind of a nice place to be. I mean, when it comes to, everything seems to be okay. And, once you start to learn, you really can't go back, but it can also be a dangerous spot that can cause a lot of heartache when it comes to the wallet.
Exactly. And, what I found myself doing is I didn't know the different types of, hoppers and what commodities primarily went into, the different covered hoppers. So I was just like, oh, I'll buy this and I'll buy this. And it really, like, no pun intended, it just went off the rails. And it truly became overwhelming, is what I keep coming back to. But it's very easy when you don't know what exactly you're looking with to start going down that road of, oh, well, that's kind of similar. Like, that'll work. This will work. That'll work. But it's very easy. I'm joking here, of course, but I'm kind of nervous that when I say this, that my buddy Dave from Tangent is going to like paratroop in and like roll down the steps and smack me. But there's a lot of people out there that just think a 4750 is a 4750.
Yeah. Well, me about a year and a half or 2 years ago, until I met you and started and others and started learning. Right. So that can easily happen.
Yeah. And what we say is a Pullman 4750 is a 4750 is going to be that classic Pullman standard 4750. If you're crazy like me, and I'm just a little bit crazy. We talked about Dave and our friends at Tangent. They're full on, like, man, they're like the model railroad equivalent of like serial killers. Like, they're going to say this is a 4750, but this is the phase that was made in the first quarter of 1978. And this one was made in the last quarter of 1981. And the thing is, they're different. And if you really look at the pictures, they're different, but then outside of like a Pullman standard 4750, you've got Portec 4750s, Thrall 4750s, Ingalls 4750s, Richmond Tank Car 4750s. And then, if you really want to confuse yourself, you've got Trinity Industry 4750s that, guess what, Ray? They pretty much look like Pullman Standard 4750s because they bought Pullman Standard and then tweaked it just a little bit. So like you can go into like a dark place here.
I think we could probably do an entire podcast just on 47, probably just on Pullman Standard 4750s, let alone all these other types that are out there. But yeah, and I think going back to that scale, let's just use that 4750 for an example. There may be some that just say, okay, 4750, whether it's a Thrall or it's a Pullman Standard or any other, it's a 4750 close enough. It likely something. It's close enough. It's a good representation. But then you get on the other side of the spectrum, like what you're talking about, where you want to have that exact. And I guess it's really just a personal thing. What's okay with you? What can you live with? Right.
Yeah. And my buddy, John, who models the chassis Decatur sub, he sent me a link to a website called, I think it's like Vintage Aerials or something like that. And it's 90s, 80s and earlier aerial photography that like insurance companies would send up planes and take pictures. And he kind of jokingly said, well, you can write off the next 2 weeks of your life when you get into here. And I pulled up, the first thing I pulled up was Root House, Illinois. And smack in front of me, I see a 1990 photograph from the air of Greene County Service, a fertilizer dealer that I'm modeling on the layout. And I have car info on it, but it's minimal. I think I've got 2 or 3 movements, and I see 4 covered hoppers. I see 2 cylindrical hoppers and 2 rib side hoppers. And the first thing I say is cylindrical hoppers, almost guaranteed it's going to be potash, probably from Canada. One of them looks like a maroon IMCX. I'm so crazy that I could just glance at it, say, I think that's maroon IMCX Mosaic. Would have came off the Canadian Pacific, went to the Belt Railway in Chicago, down the Southern Pacific, handed off to the Gateway. Boom. So we got that. The gray cylindrical next to it, it's a lease hopper of something more potash. Then I see 2 what appear to be 4750s. And I know that the movement records I have for this facility show phosphates coming out of Florida, headed up to this location. And most of the stuff I had was actually Thrall 4750 GROX patched Union, the Atlas Union Equity hoppers that they made, the yellow ones. So I have some of those, and I'm really interested because these are even though it's a grainy, dark aerial photograph, I can tell it's not those hoppers. And so I'm literally got it on the big monitor so I can zoom in, and I'm counting ribs on the side of these hoppers from an aerial photograph. And I can't remember, I think it had like 18 or so. And so then I start going to pictures of, 4750s and all this. And I'm looking at it and I say, oh, the jacking pads hang low. So this is probably going to be a Richmond, an Ingalls, or a Thrall. And so I can see that the end of the hopper, it's got a little bit of a curve to it. So that wipes out the Thrall for me, because in my head, I know it's got a pretty flat roof. I went to a chat group that I frequent that we talk about freight cars and stuff. And somebody on the group said, well, it's not an Ingalls. It doesn't have a heavy top cord across the top. So then we kind of got down to, was it Richmond and I think Portec. And either way you wrap it, we started counting the ribs, looking at everything. And I think we ended up settling that it was a Portec. And so we figured out that it was a Portec. And now I'm on the quest for which fertilizer manufacturers from the Phosphate Valley area of Florida were utilizing, I think, Portec 4750 hoppers to move product in the mid 90s.
Let's rewind a little bit, because the overall message I'm starting to get here is you can trade off your time and save money by educating yourself. And that's what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
But I start to wonder, where did you obtain all this knowledge? I mean, I'm still at the point where if you want me to identify a rail car, I'm looking for a logo on it. I'm looking for a Pullman Standard logo or a Portec logo. And yeah, and it's amazing that you've got this depth of information and depth of knowledge that you're able to get to this point. Talk about that, because I really think that education part really plays into all of this, and being able to tell the difference between these things, or a difference between, box cars other than 50 foot or 40 foot or length or whatever. Like, this really starts to help you narrow in on these guardrails as the education.
It takes time. It takes time. And I think it's a matter of refocusing your energy. And the energy that I used to spend browsing eBay and looking at stores online and wasting money, I channeled that into research and learning, doing less, learning more. And as I've said in prior episodes, there's no silver bullet. There's no switch you can flip to just figure this out. It's truly it's like doing a crossword puzzle. You're going to look for the low-hanging fruit and you start filling in the blanks. And then over time, things start to make more and more sense, and you learn more, and it's very transferable too. My buddy, friend of the podcast, Dave Honan, when we were up at Amherst last year, he has a vision for his proto freelance he's designing. And we were at a store that you introduced me to, AA Hobbies, in their glorious basement. And we're going through and looking at stuff, and he's like, oh, I could buy that, and I could buy that. And I'm just like, buddy, slow down. Think about what did you really see when you lived along these lines, and what was on your layout. And we started looking at, different covered hoppers. Like, you're going to need some pellet hoppers. It's the, Canadian Pacific XD&H line. Do we think with its, Canadian roots, is it more likely that you're going to have pellets from Texas, or do you think they're maybe going to come out of Canada? So we started looking at some of the Canadian stuff, the Procors, Rapido's 5820s, which have to say, big props to Rapido. That pellet hopper they did, killer model that filled a pretty big gap in the pellet car market. We looked at that, and one of the big industries on his layout is a paper mill. And we started talking about kaolin. And a lot of kaolin, well, really the majority of it comes out of Georgia. And it's in a wide variety of covered hoppers. But the kicker is, a lot of them aren't made. You've got like Megor 4000s and ACF 4000s. Nobody makes them. I'll tell you this though, Ray, and this ties into something we've talked about, which is the idea of rivet counting versus macro prototype modeling, which is something that Isaac Fabers and I really talk about a lot. And so ACF 4000s, a lot of kaolin gets moved in them. They aren't made. Atlas has their train man, I think it's 3560 or 3650. And if you go to the Atlas archive and look at this model car, you're going to find Southern, Norfolk Southern, and some other cars that have a little asterisk next to them. And it says schemes similar to car that's not made, or something like that. And this was Atlas saying I don't think I'm ever going to make an ACF 4000, but this is, 350 cubic feet away. Why can't I throw the Southern scheme on it? And the right number series and say it's a Kalen car. So when we talk about like rivet counting versus, what I call macro prototype modeling is and Isaac the same, we both want to represent the operations of what we're modeling to the best ability that we can. And we're willing to sacrifice a level of detail to get us across the finish line. We'll take the Trainman car, we'll take the AccuRail car, the Walthers mainline car, and we'll weather it. We'll make it look nice. We'll put 158s on it with the pins clipped. We'll put Intermountain wheel sets on it. And, you add some weight to it and you got a great model. You got a really great model. Is it the best model? No. Is it 100% accurate? No. Is it close? Yeah. And I'm fine with that, because it helps hit home the message that I'm trying to convey.
Yeah, it sounds like you can step your way towards it, not only as products are being made, but even as you start to really tune in and you start to find it. If you use a less expensive car as a stand-in, you're not putting that big money out to find out that it's wrong. You're using the stand-in to kind of figure it out and feel it out as well.
Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, my personal mantra is buy the best car available for what you're, wanting to achieve. And I tend to skew towards that rivet counter type modeler operator. And the difference between me and, some of my friends is I have friends that say, well, I won't put the Trainman car on my layout, or I'll put it on my layout, but not until I, rip all the detail off and, and hand fabricate, new stuff and paint it. That's not me. It's just, I don't have time for that. So I'm just going to operate. And when something better comes, I'm going to upgrade.
Yeah. Again, I guess you got to look in the mirror and figure out where you are on that scale. What's acceptable to you?
And something that we've talked about, Ray, is the size and scope of what you're trying to accomplish. As I've said many times, I've got a very busy life between work, a daughter, a horse, and at the same time, I'd say you've been over here. It's a fairly substantial, layout that I'm working on. If I tried to model everything with 100% fidelity, I would get absolutely nothing done. And this is coming from a person who feels like he's literally getting nothing done right now. So I'm happy with the compromise, but like you said, there's a segment of the hobby that is trending more towards the small layout that everything's super detailed. And with them, maybe they're going to have one or two engines that are detailed with every, to like a Tony Sisson's level of detail, where, everything is 100% right. And maybe they're going to have, I can't do it, not unless the museum pieces are ready to run that I can just buy and put on the layout.
What questions should you be asking about yourself as you start to plan your roster?
Well, I think, Ray, what you've got to do is one, you've got to have a very real and honest conversation with yourself about what are your goals, what level of fidelity you want in your modeling and replication of the operations of what you are modeling. And on top of that, that's going to be your how true to the prototype am I? And then once you've decided how true to that prototype you want to be, you've got to ask yourself, all right, where on that rivet counter scale am I going to fall? And that involves a lot of things. The budget's a big thing. Who's operating it? Are you building a layout for you and your 5-year-old son? If you are, maybe we keep the scale trains, rivet counter stuff and the tangent models out of the mix. Because if you're going to be operating with people that don't necessarily share the same beliefs and operating practices as you have to understand that. And you either have to get equipment that can sustain that, or be prepared to deal with, broken stirrups and airlines and brake lines and all that kind of stuff. I think that's one thing that a lot of people forget is being honest with yourself, not only about budget, but how you are as a person. And something that I've always said, I'm not a modeler in any way, shape, or form. I am a bull in a china shop. I literally probably break 25% of my models just taking them out of the packaging.
Same thing here. There's stirrups. Probably if somebody ever was able to go around here with a magnifying glass, they'd find stirrups and cut levers all over the floor. I'm sure they're here somewhere.
I can't tell you how many cars I've pulled out and broken something, and I'm like, well, that side of the car is going to the back side of the layout. Like, don't take that around the Y.
We talked earlier about getting educated. How would one go about getting educated? What steps would you recommend to them about gaining some knowledge? What would some resources be so that they can start to understand the difference, say, between a Pullman Standard 4750 and a Portec 4750?
There's so many directions you can go. And I think it really depends. Are you looking for just a general knowledge of what these things are? A great resource out there, a great site, even though they reject a lot of your photos, Ray, because of your dramatic sunlight, is my buddies at railcarphotos.com. And unlike a lot of the other sites we see, they tend to have pretty heavy detail on, manufacturers, lots. If you're looking for very high level information, you can go in there, and their search engine is very granular. And you could put in, I want to look at 4750 cubic foot rib side hoppers, and, start from there. You could go to manufacturers and, pull up a Portec on one side. You could pull up a Thrall on the other and start, comparing back and forth and looking at differences. But I really think and I guess I shouldn't say the best way. It's my way, is researching the prototype. Look at the pictures, or go out and look at cars, and then jot down car numbers, take pictures, and then do your best to go find that series of car on a Railcar Photos and say, oh, that's a Richmond 4750, or that's this. And I think when you can tie it in to a prototype that you're interested in, you truly have that interest in, it almost feels like it sticks, because you're able to have that connection to the prototype, and you just keep going back and just looking, research, learn. And it's a shampoo, rinse, repeat type deal. The more repetition you have, the more it gets ingrained in your head. And I know that I really enjoy researching, but I can't stress enough to everyone out there that I know that it's not modeling, but researching really helps open up your eyes to all the little differences and the different things that you can model. Because when you're looking at those cars over and over and over again, you pick up on those really finite details that nobody else would pick up on. And I think a great example of that, Ray, is my buddy Kevin and Norman and I. We're working on a project to build essentially every engine that the Gateway Western had. And, we're working with our friends at PDC to design decals. And Kevin and I were going through pictures, and we noticed some of the engines had a more glossy paint, and some of the engines had a more muted black and a more muted yellow. And the ones with the muted yellow, and this was before FRA stripes were a thing, or the conspicuity stripes, whatever we want to call them. The ones with the muted yellow almost had little reflectors down the side of the unit. And I started digging in and talking to some people, and it was because the ones with the more muted color were painted by VMV in Paducah, Kentucky. The super glossy ones were painted at Mid-America Car in Kansas City. And I was talking with a friend of mine, Zach Pumphrey, who used to work for Watco, and he got to operate some of the old Gateway SW1200s. And Mid-America Car painted the ex Kansas City Terminal SW1200s, and Zach was like, "Oh yeah, man, those guys laid the clear coat on thick." He's like, "If you could climb up on that SW1200, there were just globs of like hardened clear coat just dripping down the handrails." So you know me, Ray. I am a diehard Gateway person. I've been researching them since I was a kid, and I literally just picked up on that detail in the last 6 months.
Wow.
So that's a product of just research. And the more you look at things, the more they pop out at you, and you're able to really figure out what you need to go after. And I'm looking, I know I'm using a very, very granular example here, but just observe the world around you and it will tell you what you need. You just have to let it.
And if not for anything, that research just seems to spell out some really cool inside baseball stuff that's really enjoyable to learn, isn't it?
And shameless plug for Ryan Crawford and Jim Leonard and I's Gateway Western book Tony Cook is editing, and White River is putting out. Another unique fact about some Gateway engines, there was a Jeep 38 that was involved in a wreck at Sheffield Interlocking in Kansas City, and it had to be sent off to be rebuilt and fixed. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, they sent it to Conrail. And you're going to correct me here. I'm going to do my best to say this. Is it Juniata?
Juniata, yeah.
Juniata. So that's where the unit was repaired after the wreck, and it got its full paint job into the newer Gateway paint. They put the decals or the stencils on. But as we've joked about, the Gateway Western, their paint scheme almost looks like somebody made it in MS Paint 95.
Pretty much, yeah.
To the point that it almost looks like a freelance. And I was just at Brent Johnson's operating, and Tom Patterson, who's got the CWE, told me, he's like, "Man, for a while I thought that railroad model was freelance until I started seeing all the real pictures you shared." But coming back to the story, they put the 0 on upside down on the side of the cab. So it's got the brush script, and the brush's script is supposed to be to the top, and it's at the bottom.
No kidding.
So that one unit has upside down brush script 0s on the sides of the cabs. And most people would never pick up on that.
So let's talk about lessons learned tonight, as you're talking about building a fleet for prototypical operations. And we've only summarized this. I mean, we could just go on for days and days and days, like you and I typically do on the phone, about all of these wild concepts. And, and I say wild, but in reality, that they're great concepts that kind of narrow your band, get those guardrails up, save your wallet from a lot of pain, and again, add a new level of enjoyment to it by educating yourself. Talk about, some lessons learned from all of this.
Well, a big lesson is that when you let yourself, run off the rails like I did, and you find yourself with an overwhelming, almost suffocating amount of rolling stock that just doesn't make sense, you get to do these things called purges. And you basically sift through what you have, and you just say, nope, 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 and you start selling stuff. And the really positive thing about selling stuff is you can reinvest it into the right rolling stock. Or as I did in the first major purge, you can buy your wife new bedroom furniture. Which in turn makes her more tolerant of the hobby, and then you can go waste more money, but hopefully on prototypical and accurate purchases. But all jokes aside, I think I'm on purge number 6. I'm getting ready to sell some more stuff, and even with all the research I've done, I'm constantly tightening up my guardrails, more and more and more, because we had, a point where, say, Tangent would release a covered hopper and they'd have 12 numbers. And I was like, oh, that's on my line. I need that. I'm going to get all 12. And now, as I'm getting deeper into the fleet, deeper into the layout and the ops planning, I'm realizing, well, maybe I don't need 12. I only need this many. And Ray, we joke about all the time, that I'm crazy when it comes to numbers and spreadsheets and planning. But I've taken the car data that I have on all these different industry movements, and I'll break it down. And, for like everyone on my Facebook group jokes with me about my addiction to slag, but I took that covered hopper fleet that we saw loading on the Chicago and Illinois Midland, and I organized all the different types, all the different marks that I saw, and I used my math skills and my Excel skills to create percentages and, proportions on everything. And then I was able to look and say, all right, I'm going to have 100 car slag fleet. And then I apply the percentages to it. And then it says, I need 1 of this car, 2 of this car, 3 of this. And then what I do is I've done that for essentially every industry lane on my layout in my ops plan. And then I've got my spreadsheet that has every model that I own, and anything that I need, I add it into the spreadsheet, and I put a tag on it that says, purchase. And that becomes my hunt list. That's going to drive my save searches on eBay and so on and so on. And when I've got it saved to a OneDrive, so when I'm at Amherst and I'm hunting, I can just pull my phone out and look at model numbers, card numbers. I've got everything there. That's just where I'm at now. I go to shows. I have a great time. It's a social event, and I love the hunt. I've replaced kind of that retail therapy with hunting, and it just makes me happy now.
Well, some solid advice on building a fleet of prototypical operating cars. Also, maybe some advice squeezed in there on marriage advice and how to spend your money when you get it recouped. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing that. We talked about guardrails in this show, and now we're going to slide over to the question of the month that involves guardrails. This is where you, the listener, can be heard here on Around the Layout podcast. You go to aroundthelayout.com/question. This month's question was, what are your guardrails when it comes to buying locomotives and rolling stock? Or do you have any guardrails? We asked you to tell us what guides you in the purchasing process in 90 seconds or less. We had 12 awesome answers to the question of the month. We're going to roll through all of them, because when you get 12 of them, how can you cut any of them out? It's so amazing. We had so many awesome responses. So we're going to dive right into it. We are going to start with Aaron. Here we go.
Hi, Ray. This is Aaron Chekla from London, Ontario. My layout is focused on a single industry, a proto-freelance food processor called Guardrails that is set between the years 2018 and 2023. This layout theme already provides some robust guardrails, since the rolling stock I purchased for the layout needs to be both able to carry the commodities that are brought into or out of the food processor and fit the era to which I am modeling. As much as I want to have a parade of auto racks or cement hoppers on my shelf layout, they just don't fit into the scheme. Also, while Prairie Girl Grains is a completely freelance industry, I try to purchase rolling stock with reporting marks that would be commonly found in Canadian national manifests, since this is the Class 1 I've chosen to have my industry contract with. Lastly, while I do love SD75Is and SD70 ACEs, there is no room for 6-axle power on my layout. I have limited myself to 4-axle power, in particular released power in the form of GP15-1s, MP15ACs, and DCs that would be available in my era to perform the within-industry switching. Looking forward to hearing other modelers' guardrails. Hope you and everyone else listening has a great modeling season, and I look forward to hearing this in every episode.
Well, thank you, Aaron. Appreciate your response. And Matt, some guardrails for sure all in there.
It is. And he brought up a really interesting point about, the whole prairie grow thing and the commodities. And this is where there's layers. It's like tiramisu. There's layers to it. And you can take what he said even further. And I believe we touched on this a little bit in the car routing episode, but in researching my layout, I looked at wheat movements, and I was talking with Eric Goodman, and he was like, I had asked him, I said, Santa Fe had all these 4750s. Why am I really just seeing 4427s? And he's like, it's wheat. He said Santa Fe figured out that wheat, you could basically load a 4427 to the top and it would weigh out perfectly, because it was a little bit denser, and the corn and soybeans were lighter. So they typically put the corn and soybeans whenever possible in the larger cubic feet.
There you go. That inside baseball information paying off for sure. And now you got yourself an arrow to write down. We mentioned him earlier. Let's head out to Washington and hear from David Honan himself.
Uh-oh.
This is Dave Honan from Snoqualmie, Washington. Guardrails have come up in previous responses I've given to questions of the month. And as always, I'm indebted to Matt Freix and Isaac Fabers for encouraging me to establish them and then help define what they are. My layout will be a proto-freelance representation of a former Delaware and Hudson branch line in upstate New York, set in 1994. So I've been researching the actual cars that were used on that line in that era and developing a long list of models that are suitable. Just days after Ray first announced this question, I took my target list to the annual Boeing Employee Model Railroad Club swap meet in Kent, Washington, outside Seattle, and stuck to the script. I only made purchases of cars on the list. No new unnecessary locomotives, no cars that looked neat, no books. Oh, who am I kidding? I love books. And of course I succumbed to that temptation. But for the model trains, I stayed straight and true inside the guardrails and felt immense satisfaction to leave the show with 8 needs checked off and a wad of cash still in my wallet. Having said that, I do sometimes make purchases that are not strictly related to my layout plans. A recent manufacturer announcement led me to pre-order 2 locomotives unrelated to my proto-freelance, but this decision opened an opportunity to build a diorama to feature them and let me model another of my interests, large bridges. I intend to use this project as a stepping stone for learning skills I'll need to build my layout.
Well, thank you, David. Appreciate that answer. And books aren't a bad thing. You don't have to have too many guardrails for getting education.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie to people. I buy stuff that's not within the guardrails, from time to time. Like we talked, Ray, I've got a V&O C30-7 that I picked up from our friends at Home Shops. Do I need it? Absolutely not. But you know what? I grew up really, kind of idolizing that freelance, and it's something that it's going to look cool on the shelf, and you can splurge every now and again.
And now let's hear from Billy.
Hi, Ray. I'm Billy Brown from New Jersey. The guardrails I have are my prototype and my era. My prototype is a Pennsylvania Railroad. I model the Bordentown branch just south of Trenton in roughly 1929. So that means you're not really, you're getting pretty much all steam engines, and you're getting a lot of smaller boxcars, smaller cars and stuff like that. You don't even have covered hopper cars yet. So that's what kind of is my guardrails. I did admittedly, when I first started, buy a bunch of 40-foot boxcars, and probably about half of them weren't technically in the era because they were probably built a little bit later in the 30s. But they're still there right now until I eventually get around to replacing them. So, but I keep trying to stay on those guardrails. It's been pretty well for me, except it is dangerous when Broadway Limited brings out another small Pennsylvania Railroad steam engine and I need to get it. Because really, on this branch, it didn't get anything bigger than the L1s, the Pennsylvania Railroad Mikados. Now, I did join a Model Railroad Club, and that is a little bit more dangerous because I can run anything I want there. And so that kind of is like, well, do I start getting some of my old Reading stuff out and fixing that up and maybe buying another F7? Things that are slightly out of my prototype, but we'll see.
Well, thank you, Billy. And clubs seem to be a good way to step outside those guardrails and have a little bit of fun.
Put that GG1 out there with the double stacks behind it and let it fly.
That's right. That's right. Good place for it. And now we'll head down south with Hank.
My name is Hank Stevens, and I hail from way down yonder on the Chattahoochee in West Point, Georgia. As far as guardrails go, to quote an old movie, guardrails, we don't need no stinking guardrails in Alabama. All joking aside, I try to buy based on a working concept I've already designed in Georgia Road Transportation. If you're interested in it, you can find it online. It has its own website. The problem with not having a layout and not building is I become more of a collector than a operator. So anything that piques my interest, if it can potentially fit, I may pick it up even though I really don't need it. At this point, I've got a whole room in my house that's just full of boxes and totes and things where I've been collecting trains for about 20 years. Unfortunately, it'll probably be another year or 2 or 3 before I actually try to build something. So I will continue collecting as money permits, and sometimes even if it doesn't. Hopefully one day a layout will be built and I can rationalize things and there will be some semblance of method to my madness.
Well, thank you, Hank. And Hank, great to hear from you. And I know you're going to one day get that railroad built.
And a big shout out to Hank, notable freelance modeler. And I heard through the grapevine that he's got a soft spot in his heart for the Gateway Western.
All right. Now we're going to hear from Bob Stafford.
My name is Bob Stafford from Marysville, Washington. My guardrails when it comes to buying locomotives and rolling stock are a 1958 cutoff date. That's because I modeled the anthracite railroads of northeastern Pennsylvania. And in 1959, the Matlock trucking suit against the Lehigh New England Railroad Company resulted in the loss of all the bulk shipments of cement by rail prior to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruling that allowed for the transportation of bulk cement by truck. Trucks were only allowed to transport packaged cement. Once this ruling went into effect, the car loadings from the cement mills dropped substantially, and the railroads never recovered the business back to this day.
I always joke about how I feel like I'm just a crazy kind of outlier. And these responses are making me feel good, man. Like, people care about this stuff.
You're not alone. Let's head out to Oregon and Jeff Schultz.
Hi, my name's Jeff Schultz, and I'm from Staten, Oregon. And the guardrails I use on my Willamette Western Railroad are ERA. It's generally early to mid 2000s. So beginning 2005-ish, ending 2010-ish. And it has to have a reasonable reason to be on my layout, which is located in the general Pacific Northwest. So we're talking agriculture, a little bit of steel, and a lot of lumber, timber products. That basically limits me from going totally crazy. One thing that does break the guardrails is passenger cars, because this railroad that I am kind of modeling mine after has been known to host private passenger trains on occasion. So I get to put whatever I want in there. And occasionally I do.
When Eric Hansman ends the RPM report at the end of what's happening in model railroading, he says, let the prototype be your guide. And it seems like this is the same case with Jeff Schultz.
Very much so. And one of the things that I'm hearing from all the responses is there's different ways to get to the same, end goal. And some of the people are a little bit more on the crazy side like me. Some of them have very defined guardrails, but they're still a little looser, and to each their own. Use it the way it works best for you.
Now to head to Texas and Chuck Stansel.
Hi, this is Chuck Stansel of Logic Rail Technologies from Houston, Texas. I have one guardrail when it comes to buying locomotives and rolling stock, and that is ERA. I modeled the Chicago Northwestern Railway's West Line in the mid-1970s. As such, I can easily avoid anything in the modern era and protect my wallet. However, anything you'd find in the 50s through mid-70s is fair game for me. I'll admit to stretching history a bit, though. For example, the Burlington Northern had not yet formed on my layout. I still like the paint schemes of the CB&Q, so there's some of that on my layout. Finally, cost is actually not too much of a guardrail for me. I'm fortunate to be able to fund my hobby purchases with profits from Logic Rail. So, there's a loco or piece of rolling stock I like, then I'm going to get it. Thanks for continuing to put out great content on the ATLP. Bye for now.
No, my pleasure, Chuck, and thank you so much for your answer. And again, ERA, and I think about even, he's talking about the ERA he's got with, a wide margin, but even if you were to say you're going to model modern day, I'm seeing cars out there that still say 1979 and 1980 on them. So there's a 45-year gap there. There's a lot of rolling stock in between. So even picking an era doesn't necessarily pin you in all the way. It does give you some, now you just got to decide how tight you want those guardrails, but it can be wide even just by picking an era.
Well, I think Chuck might be a little coy with us right now too, because saying, I just modeled the 60s and 70s. I think if I were to go to, the Tangent archive right now, that there would be a cluster bomb of dollar signs of potential purchases that one could make with that guardrail. So I don't know if I buy that it's protecting his wallet.
That may be the case. Sticking in the Houston, Texas area, let's listen to Michael Spohr.
Good afternoon, Ray. My name is Michael Spohr, and I'm from Texas. My guardrails for freight cars are any that would be accurate for the industries on my layout in 1995. For passenger cars, it would be cars that would be accurate for the California Zephyr and Illinois Zephyr in 1995. For engines, I try to acquire similar engines to the photos I have from the locations on my layout in 1995. Thank you.
That photographic evidence certainly is valuable, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And Michael's a good friend of mine, and he's not quite as crazy as I am, but he definitely has the guardrails. He has multiple sets of guardrails though, because he has a multi-era layout, and he bounces between I think the 60s or 50s and the 90s. So there's multiple guardrails out there. So he gets hit twice.
Awesome stuff. All right, now let's hear from Paul.
Hey Ray, Paul here from Minnesota. I found the best guardrail is to switch to an obscure scale like S, where there is nothing and you have to make it all yourself. It's so hard these days to see all these new products in HO and N coming out and think, hey, I don't need any of that. It's awesome. Thanks. Bye.
Well, Paul, there's one way to make sure that, you just pick a scale where the inventory is limited.
He's crying in the corner because there's nothing he can buy, and I'm crying in the corner because I bought too much.
All right, let's head to Raymond Stewart.
Hey, Ray, this is Raymond Stewart from North Georgia. My guardrails for buying rolling stock are for freight cars, anything 1980 and newer. For my current railroad, which is a Mid-America Northwestern, the time stops in 2015. And the only cars that I generally buy that are older than 1980 built are passenger cars. Appreciate the work that you're doing. Keep it up. Thank you.
Well, there's that 1980 number again where, there's even 2015 up to 2025. Like I said, I'm going out along the CSX and Norfolk Southern out in New York, and I'm seeing 79 and 80 on those cars.
I was going to say, you just saw that Rock Thrall 4750 that was in shockingly good shape. Maybe you can make that the cover image.
That may be. That might have to be the one. All right, let's head to Steven here.
Hey guys, it's Steven Shantz of Cambridge, Ohio. Probably the strictest guardrail I have is I modeled the Santa Fe in the spring of 1995. So biggest example of that would be SD75Ms. Those were just starting to be delivered in the spring of 95. So I have two. I have 206 and 209 being really low numbered. They were probably like days or weeks old in my time period. So that's probably the biggest example. And another small guardrail is that I like to model Ohio Central engines that I've been on since I'm an employee there. So there's small guardrails of that too, but nothing too extremely extreme with that. Love the podcast, guys. Hope to maybe talk to you on it someday. Until next time, take care, guys.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And he mentions a season, spring of 1995. But I had this concept in my mind, like, what if you modeled one day on a railroad and that was the only day you ever ran on it? Boy, that would be like the tightest guard. That'd be like a one-way street kind of guardrails, wouldn't it?
Well, yes. And I think first I have to say, big shout out to Steve for doing God's work and modeling the Santa Fe in 1995. Big fan. Definitely reach out, shoot me a message or something we can connect on that. But I look at Ryan Crawford, Ray, and, he's got all the CNIM paperwork, and he's literally just pulling a day's worth of trains out and looking at it and saying, I can model this. I can model this. So I think he's in that group where he's got the tightest guardrails, except he's got, maybe 100 days worth of paperwork.
All that inside baseball paying off for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And last but not least, Zachary.
My name is Zachary, and I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. For guardrails, I use locomotives need to be from 1990 to 2010 in service, preferably EMDs, so GP40s, SD40 type locomotives, best from switching on my small layout. And for rolling stock, I tend to also keep it in the same era, though I will tweak it a little bit if it's names I like Seaboard Central, which is 2015, but for the heck of it, I'll make it 2010, just so it fits in on the layout. And also, as I'm recording this on November 11th, Happy Veterans Day to everyone in the U.S., and also Happy Remembrance Day to our friends across the pond in the Atlantic and our across Australian friends in the Pacific.
Well, yes, a belated Veterans Day and Remembrance Day to all that served their countries, and certainly do appreciate your response, Zachary. And again, more of the same of these guardrails, and it's just amazing that there are folks just like you out there, Matt.
Yep, and the thing I keep hitting on is that there's layers to it. What is tiramisu? That's the new catchphrase, tiramisu, man. Like there's different ways to go about it, and some people like it a little crazier. Some people like it a little looser, but at the end of the day, it's going to help you make better decisions. It's going to protect your wallet, and I think you're going to be happier by putting a little effort in on the front end. Your overall experience is just going to be better with the hobby. It's just my opinion.
Well, excellent. That'll put a wrap on this episode of Around the Layout podcast. All the links that we mentioned in today's show will be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com/202. Do us a favor, if you found something in this episode that you think somebody could learn from, hit the share button and share that with your friends. Matt, thank you so much for coming on Around the Layout and telling us all about building a fleet for prototypical operations.
Thanks for having me on, Ray.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout. You got to know who's coming. It is Matthew Freix. Matt, welcome back.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Pleasure.
There's one.
Your blooper.
There's one. Hi, David.